Hello, I'm ZistXkin, and I saw a video by a favorite YouTuber of mine, Tyler Preston, where he posed questions to anarcho capitalists. And I thought I'd respond to the video, even though I don't really think I qualify as an anarcho capitalist. I'm definitely a capitalist, and I do believe that a stateless society is possible and probably preferable. But I don't think these guys and Tyler really find the difference that I draw to be significant. So I think my answers are in the ballpark of what they're looking for.
I think that the non-aggression principle would play out in practice. It's something that every person in that society would have to be educated on and abide by. I know you don't advocate for no system of government and no laws, but the mere idea of a non-aggression principle, it just seems outlandish, at least as an expectation for how people should act.
The non aggression principle already plays out in practice most of the time. Most interactions between people, even negative ones, don't resort to violence. A similar question to this would be if there were no police and no laws, why wouldn't people resort to violence and theft more often? And the answer in a stateless society is the same as in a stated one: a system of incentives and disincentives to motivate behavior we like and discourage behavior we don't. Some places, most places probably, would have hired private police forces who would arrest you just like normal. Otherwise, one idea I've heard, which I'm a little skeptical of too, but it's meant to work in concert with other forms of justice like a private police force. It would be a system of personal credit. So if you behave badly, I can report you to some appropriate creditor authority. Then when you apply for a job or try to get a plane ticket or rent a house, the proprietor would do a credit check on you, and they might decide not to do business with someone who commits acts of violence. But also, or the likeliest thing is that if you tried to attack someone, they would probably shoot you, or someone else would shoot you. So there's that too.
How would a country defend its borders in an ANCAP system? Do you even believe in the idea of a country?
Well, no, I don't really. That's what we're talking about.
Expect to maintain a nation state without any kind of a government to defend the borders of said nation state? Do you plan on everybody just as soon as there's trouble taking up arms? What about the people who don't want to fight? Would you force them to defend the homeland?
So first, there'd be no state in a stateless society, and the only borders I have any right to take interest in are the borders around my own property. But to the greater question of what would a stateless country do about a foreign invader, is if there were a big enough demand for it, then there would be private military companies which would defend whatever border people thought was worth the expense. Such a military would be way leaner than the current US military, and definitely not be involved in lengthy foreign occupations. And if you're skeptical that even a smaller but more concentrated military would be affordable to a majority of regular people, then I am suggesting that those who own the most and do the most business are greatly incentivized to pay for it. You can't run your fast food joint with British troops marching down the streets, and you can't run your car wash if all of your employees are in internment camps.
You guys claim that everything that the state does end up in violence. Has there not been a point where the state does not do something that end up in violence?
Yes, the state's actions do not end in violence when you submit to its authority. But I want to clarify that it isn't that everything the state does ends in violence. It's that everything the state does comes with an implicit threat of violence. That's why we look cockeyed when BLM advocates say the police are being brutal with someone who is resisting arrest. We all know that if you continually resist a police officer's authority, the situation could escalate to lethal force. Not saying that's good or bad, that's just how it works, and we need to be honest about what that is and what that means.
Why do you guys hate taxes so much?
Because I'm being forced under the threat of incarceration to pay money, and I don't feel like I'm getting my dollar's worth out of the deal.
How do you rationalize the idea that taxation is theft? I know you'll always default to the argument that, well, if you don't pay it, there are people coming to your door with guns to take you away or to take the money by force. But you're forgetting that you participate in a society. And I don't want to be the guy who says that this is some sort of necessary cost of living in a society because of the benefits that it provides. But have you ever thought about it that way?
Because paying taxes is compulsory, and the consequences of not paying those taxes is incarceration or death if I resist. So it's really robbery, not theft. And yeah, you've preempted this argument, but I'm in complete agreement with you. I am part of a society that robs people as a necessary part of its function. Again, this isn't calling it good or bad, this is just an accurate description of the way things are. So when I say it's robbery to force me to pay taxes, I'm just stating a fact. When you say the outcome is good, you're making an argument.
Somalia is not the best example of an anarchist society, then what is?
I don't know.
You expect to keep your citizenry safe from rogue companies, essentially, who want to cut corners at the cost of the consumer and workers' safety.
Well, I wouldn't buy their products and I wouldn't take their jobs. A large corporation or whatever that can't depend on a government bailout only exists if there's a customer base paying for it to exist. If some company cuts corners and made inferior paper plates, they'd sell fewer of them. If some company cut corners on employee safety equipment, they'd have a lot of people quitting and or demanding much higher wages. But if by some quirk of the market enough customers and employees supported such a business, then clearly enough people think they provide value. You and I are free to not do business with them if we find their products or employment lacking, but other people are.
A constitutional republic is not the best way to run a country. What is the best government to run a country?
I don't know. I think it's being suggested here that the best way to run a country would be with no government.
How do you implement a working ANCAP society?
You would institute a society like this by making the government obsolete, and by finding private means of providing the few services people believe absolutely must come from the government, like welfare and domestic defense.
An ANCAP system allow me to sell a 9-year-old heroin-addicted child prostitute into slavery?
In principle, yes, as long as there was enough of a demand to make it profitable. However, civilized societies have universally condemned slavery as an undisputable evil, in spite of the economic benefits of it. I think it would be highly unlikely you'd get any sort of traction in your business, and speaking only for myself, but with the assertion that mine is a majority position, if we were living in such a society and I found out you were selling slaves, I'd kill you. Sorry.
Does the free markets do everything better than the government?
Well, rolling dice to make decisions would be a better decision-making process than the current US government. But how a free market makes good decisions, though? Free markets enact good policy because they are highly reactive to cost and demand. If there was a demand by the market to end child slavery, since it's already been brought up, then the market would end the practice by making it unprofitable. And it would do this very quickly and without the need for a civil war.
You plan on maintaining things like hospitals, police stations, and roads without any source of regulation to keep them in order.
We already have private hospitals, private police forces, and private roads. We just have more of them. And again, this is another thing that's asserted to be way too expensive for regular people to afford. And again, hospitals, police, and roads are very valuable things to have when you're running a business. You can't have customers if they're all sick, or murdered, or stuck in traffic. It behooves people who make their living off the patronage of the masses to ensure that these things are around.
Why do most of the ANCAPs that I've discussed things with default to the ethical arguments of everything? Nothing is black and white. I don't think everything can be decided on ethical grounds. And I think if it can, it's subjective enough that it can be argued either way.
Well, I assume that they, like me, value the ethical arguments to these questions. Earlier, I responded to how would a free market do things better than a government? And I answered it, but my honest response to this idea is that it doesn't actually need to be better. It definitely is. But even if it weren't, the mere fact that it is purely voluntary and comes with no implication of violence is a compelling point all on its own. And I don't think it should be discounted. And yeah, it's totally subjective. Reality ultimately is. That's why I've said twice, not saying it's good or bad. We can argue if whether or not robbery is bad, or if it's justified if the state does it. But we can't argue with whether or not taxation.
If you vote with your wallet, doesn't that mean you get more power if you have more money?
What you described is how things are right now. Big, powerful entities with lots of lobbying money can wield the government like a weapon to achieve their goals. But the fact that those with the most wealth have the most power is a tautology. The only way to correct this problem is to redefine what having power means. If it doesn't mean you can start wars or jail people, then frankly, what else is there to worry about?
I think that taking the holistic approach medically, rather than a strictly regulated and very well funded medical sector, is the better way to go.
Well, no to both of your choices. I prefer to choose medical treatment based on its adherence to science. Whether or not Ted Cruz or the like gives it his stamp of approval is completely irrelevant to me.
If the non-aggression principle is about not inflicting violence onto people, is it safe to say that most people tend to violate the non-aggression principle?
No, most people do not violate the non-aggression principle most of the time.
So, I suppose my question for anarchists is relatively straightforward. How do you account for power? Now, this being with the recognition that power is itself a force of nature, an inevitability within social groupings. Understanding that within social groupings, power structures will inevitably emerge, and that in large enough groups, over long enough periods of time, those structures will themselves become something of an institution. So given the nature of power to develop within social groupings and to create everything that you seem ideologically opposed to, how do you account for power in your calls for a voluntarist utopia?
Yeah, a stateless society would be really hard to implement and really hard to maintain. That's not really the point. The point is to always do better with your society, to always improve it, and to reduce the role of governments in our day-to-day lives is that improvement. No one should be trying for utopia because utopia doesn't exist. But it's a useful goal to work toward.
What happened to people who simply cannot work?
Well, hopefully there's someone who loves them enough to take care of them. Barring that, there are plenty of charities that exist today in spite of taxation. So imagine the amount people would give if they had an extra 30% in their paycheck. But I also think someone who really can't work is an exceedingly rare sort of person. If you can't walk, learn to type. If you're retarded, work in a warehouse. If you're blind, be a greeter at Walmart. Not to mention the creative industry hardly requires anyone to be of sound body and mind.
Okay, serious question this time. How would an ANCAP system deal with water reclamation and sewage and stuff like that?
Everyone who doesn't want shit in their house is going to either pay for a sewage system or they're going to shovel it out themselves.